So the ASD perspective on high school. So for this section, I contacted Jeanette Perkis, who is a ASD advocate, and she speaks very candidly and insightfully about her experiences through the high school system and more broadly in the education system in Australia. I'll put a link to a whole number of things she's written and produced on the topic if you want to have a bit of a further read about them there. These are her core ideas that she would like to have been able to communicate to high school teachers if she had gone back in time, or in her current role as an ASD advocate. I'm passing them on to you. So firstly, change and transition are the most tricky things. As I said earlier in the piece, transitioning from primary school to high school is one of the most difficult, and in a high school setting, changing from class to class, teacher to teacher, year to year, subject to subject is also challenging. So perfectionism is a big thing. So earlier when I referenced incomplete work, unfinished work, or work that was lost, one of the explanations for that could quite often be perfectionism. So the student with ASD feels that the work they've produced is not of a high enough standard, so rather than submit it, they'll simply throw it away or dispose of it in some other means. Be aware of interoception, which is basically monitoring your own internal states. So hunger, need to go to the bathroom, temperature, those sort of things. For some people with ASD, this is something that they're not entirely as able to track as a neurotypical person. So just be aware of this, that it may be an issue for your ASD. Group work and collective activities are generally not well received by ASD people. Including ASD students into these activities, you probably have to weigh up the challenges and the potential benefits for that student, who probably is much more able of completing the task that you've set without the assistance of their peers, as this may cause them further and heightened states of anxiety. But having said that, don't lower your expectations of people with ASD. Always give them a chance to prove themselves for a variety of tasks, and then modify based off that. Don't just take sort of a stock understanding of what an ASD student may be or think or feel, rather work with the individual sitting in front of you. The behavior of autistic students is not, basically, just simply put, not being drawn from the same place that we understand. So if you see an autistic student hit someone, for us that means of course they must be angry, whereas that's not necessarily the case, and that's why it's really important, in my opinion, to observe the student and try and understand the causes and the reasons behind the behavior, because they're not inherently the same as for us. Not all ASD people are geniuses, and not all of them are interested in STEM subjects. Sort of a generalization I made earlier to science and mathematics being a strength. Quite often that's not the case, and a range of different subjects can be strong for any individual student, as is the case for any ASD student. Just keep in mind, some ASD students will be incredibly intelligent, but as they have a spiky profile, that will not necessarily be manifested or entirely clear for you in your subject. So the student who is face down on their desk in your class may be the top of the class in another school setting or another class. And it's important to just keep that in mind and not to write them off as unintelligent based off their behaviours in your class. For ASD students, exams are really quite a poor manifestation of their ability. Anxiety is a common issue for ASD students, and exams are, of course, as for any student, a cause of a great deal of anxiety and stress. As you would with any student, as much as possible, try and explain the why of an activity and the purpose and what that student independently will get out of that sort of an activity, and how it may lead down the track to something beneficial for them. Common subject of concern is PE. So if you think about, getting changed in a communal area, playing in a team sport, being asked to compete against their peers, where there's potentially bullying and a range of other things, just be aware PE is a real area of concern. This is not something especially convenient for us in our high school setting, but ideally at an organizational level, it's ideal to have sort of a quiet space, a breakout space, or somewhere where the ASD student can go either during class or elsewhere. Quite often the ASD students in a high school will find these spaces automatically, whether it's the library or a coding club or those sort of things where there's a quiet space for them to be by themselves. But if you have a student who has behavioural issues or sensory issues, whenever possible, it would be ideal for them to have a place to go to sort of calm down and get their sensitivity down out of a heightened state, so they can then return to class and continue learning. The last thing I'll say is just that anxiety is a very important and significant thing for ASD people. As Professor Mark Stokes said, he describes intelligence as the ability to interrogate your own thoughts and feelings. And I'm probably paraphrasing him poorly here, but he said that essentially ASD people have less ability to analyze and assess their own body states and their own intellectual and mental states. And what this means is that there is less makeup, less fix-up time. So if you think of perhaps the most embarrassing moment of your life, when you tried to talk to that girl or that boy, you did that speech where you couldn't talk, and then consider the possibility that you might have to do that event again, but without being able to make significant changes to what your previous performance, and being able to build on that and make a development from there. You may get some idea as to why ASD people have a heightened state of anxiety throughout their lives. People with ASD on average live 16 years less than neurotypical people, and anxiety is one significant factor in this. So our role as teachers is basically to minimize anxiety as much as possible, and I hope that the series of videos that you've just watched give you some idea as to how you can minimize anxiety for your ASD students and allow them to strive and thrive in your classrooms.